All right, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Great. Welcome back to our webinar series, and welcome if this is your first time attending. My name is Shannon Bennett. I'm a clinical psychologist at Weill Cornell, and I'm the site clinical director of the New York Presbyterian Youth Anxiety Center at Weill Cornell.
And I'm Dr. Andrea Temkin. I'm another clinical psychologist at the New York Presbyterian Youth Anxiety Center at Weill Cornell.
So our topic tonight is coping and conflict management during challenging times. We have had other topics in our previous webinars. We've had more on coping in previous webinars, and all of these will be posted online. Many are online already, so we'll share those links with you at the end if you want to view things that we've talked about in the past.
And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to use the question and answer tab. We will likely save questions to the end, but we will see them along the way.
So our agenda for today, we're going to focus on coping, building your reserves, specifically coping during times of conflict and opportunities to walk away and try to avoid or prevent conflicts to begin with. We'll also address some of the questions that you already sent in or the questions that you send in towards the end. So this current situation with COVID-19 has created incredible stress for everyone, for many, many people. There's worries about our own health and safety, the health and safety of our family members. Many people have very serious concerns around job loss and financial struggles. There's a general sense of uncertainty that's keeping us all somewhat on edge. At the same time, this is paired with a loss of many of the outlets that we usually have or that we seek out that help us to cope when things are getting tough and that make us feel good. So we can't go out as often or as freely as we would like. We don't have as frequent social interactions with our colleagues or our friends or our loved ones. Some of us have had to change our exercise routines. We can't get out and enjoy all of the amazing things our city has to offer, the parks, the museums, movies, or even just having your own space, a few minutes to yourself can be really hard to come by right now, making this even more stressful. So all of this is not ideal. These things don't go together well. So we really wanted to focus today on ways that you can manage your stress over time and in the moment, particularly in moments of conflict. This is really important for us as individuals. It's also important for our family and for our relationships with our family members or other people that you may be co-living with right now. Not only does high stress impact our ability to problem solve and respond appropriately when we're interacting with our kids or other family members, but our kids are also looking to us for their clues on how to respond to stress and to difficult emotions. So because your response to these stressors is so important, we thought it was really important to start by talking about how parents can cope in times of stress and challenge. But we also understand there's some really real barriers that come up around this topic, particularly right now. For one, often as parents, we are very focused on how our kids are doing, and we may put that in front of our own needs. We may even forget to take care of our own needs when we're really focused on the needs of our kids. Number two, we understand that sometimes parents, may know that they're struggling and want to do something about it, but feel like they really don't have the time or the resources to take care of themselves. And we hear from parents who feel like it's their responsibility to just sort of keep things together, hold the whole family together, keep a stiff upper lip, and just deal with things when times get hard. All of these make sense. These are very real concerns and real realities for many people. It's really easy for us as parents to be fully focused on our kids and to put every ounce of our energy into how our kids are doing, particularly when things are hard or we perceive that they are having a hard time. We can also understand the want to just muscle through and cope with hard times and not focus too much on ourselves. But We also see consistently that when parents don't take enough time to take care of themselves first, it does catch up with us. For anyone, parents or any individual, we have to take care of ourselves, or it does catch up with us in the end. So when it feels impossible to prioritize yourself, it's important to keep in mind that the time you do spend on yourself will make you function that much more effectively in the rest of your day. It'll make you that much more present and able to do what you need to do for the other people in your lives that you're doing things for, and will probably save you time and mental energy in the long run. So we use this rule of thumb that we hear when you're on an airplane, the instruction to put on your mask first before you help others. This does really hold true in this scenario. So we're going to talk first about ways that we can put our masks on first to take care of ourselves. And we encourage parents to adopt that frame of mind. So taking care of yourself first so that you can properly take care of the other people in your life. So one way to do this is building our own reserves through self-care. So in talking about helping parents to cope, we're going to first talk about how to build up a reserve of well-being so you have plenty of buffer room when you do hit a stressor like what we're going through right now. The first priority here is taking care of yourself and really fulfilling your own very basic needs. Things like eating well, eating enough, getting enough sleep, taking care of yourself, proper hygiene, things like that. If we think of our own levels of distress like a thermometer, right, we want to stay as close to zero or the lower numbers as possible so that when we do face a stressor or a problem that makes our temperature rise, we don't totally boil over. If we're kind of living life at a 6, 7, 8 out of 10, it doesn't take much to flip us to the top of the scales. We want to live life at like a 0, 1, 2, so that when something stressful happens, we're still in a place where we can effectively manage that. For anyone, when we're at an 8, 9, or 10, we're really not thinking clearly. We can't manage things as effectively as we would like to. So we're going to talk about strategies that can help us lower our own internal temperatures, our emotional temperatures. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're not feeling well, those numbers are just going up whether we want them to or not. So a lot of this is happening right now, and we're going to have to take some extra effort to keep our numbers lower so that it won't take as much to push us over the edge. And beyond those very basic needs, we also want to try to carve out some time for the activities that make us feel good, things we enjoy, things that help us to feel calm, that fill our cup, that fulfill us in some way. This also helps us to reset that distress thermometer, possibly even provide more of a buffer when things get hard so that we're better equipped to manage the very real problems that are happening right now.
So all of that sounds really great, but a lot of the questions that we got in were, so how do I actually do this? How do I cope in these really stressful circumstances? And we're going to talk through some specific ways to do that. So when we think about building up your reserves, we want to create a realistic plan that is going to help you feel good in the long run. So you can sort of see this chart on the screen. If you want, feel free to pull out a piece of paper. You can jot down a chart for yourself. And what we want to start with is picking 1 to 2 areas of your life that you want to focus on. Select areas that you know would have a significant impact on your mood, your well-being, if you were able to make some progress there. So you're not going to pick everything. You're not going to pick sleep and mental health and exercise and social and hobby, but pick 1 or 2 of those that you think would really make a difference. If there's some other category that isn't on this example list, that's fine. So once you pick 1 to 2 areas that you think would be really helpful for you, then you want to think about, okay, what would I want a long-term goal to be in that area? So if I picked sleep, maybe I want my long-term goal to be getting 8 hours of sleep consistently. If you picked hobbies, maybe you want to set a certain number. So I want to make sure I spent 2 hours a week doing something I enjoy, or maybe you want to pick something really specific, like at the end of working on this, I want to be able to make this really beautiful cake with all these decorations, right? You can make it something that feels interesting or meaningful to you. If you pick exercise, do you want to exercise 3 times a week, and build up to that? So pick something that you would find meaningful and that you would like to work towards. And then you're going to select 1 small concrete step that you can take to work towards that goal. So if you picked, I want to work towards getting 8 hours of sleep a night, your one concrete step might be sleeping 15 minutes earlier than you normally do. If you picked exercise and eventually you want to exercise 3 times a week for an hour each time, for now, you're going to pick doing one online yoga video for 20 minutes. So again, we're really thinking of breaking this down to what are my areas, what's my long-term goal, and what's one small step I can take right now that will help me along the way that doesn't feel so daunting. And as you start to get into the room of this, you'll change your steps. You'll add a little bit more. You'll be able to progress, but we really want to take these things sort of one thing at a time. If you're looking at this and you're feeling really stuck, makes lots of sense. Lots of people can feel really overwhelmed when we're thinking about trying to build these reserves and how am I actually going to find the time to do it. So we have a few little tips that you can use to try and create a plan like this and stick to it. So the first thing is to create realistic expectations. Don't set the goal of getting 10 hours of sleep a night if you have a full-time job and you have kids who wake up at 6 in the morning, right? It's not going to happen. We're never going to get 10 hours of sleep. Don't say that you want to be able to run 10 miles in 3 months if you haven't exercised in a year, right? So we want to pick something that actually feels doable. It doesn't feel so daunting that it becomes too scary or overwhelming to try. And then you want to start, like we talked about, with really, really small, reasonable goals. A lot of people get really eager and excited when it comes to creating changes like this. You set really lofty goals for yourself. But because we haven't been working on it all along, it can be hard to fulfill them. So we really want to start with small incremental steps. If you're looking at this and you thought, oh, that's great, I can do that. I'm going to commit to exercising an hour today and on Saturday, I would cut that in half. Commit to exercising for 20 minutes or 30 minutes one day this week, maybe 2 days this week. Nothing succeeds like success. So if you can start small, feel good about what you accomplished, you'll be more able to build than if you set a really big lofty goal and didn't feel like you were able to make it. And then feel free to give yourself small rewards and to use social support. So if you pick the exercise one and that's really hard for you, reward yourself with your favorite piece of candy or play your favorite song even though your kids hate it, right? Put on something that makes you feel good, little reward, little treat for yourself for doing something and sticking with it. And do use your social support. So loop in your partner, loop in your kids, your sister, your aunt, your neighbor, text them, tell them what you're doing, ask them to help keep you accountable. Not only can they help check in about it, but when you do it, they can help make you feel good about it. So when you text them and say, oh, I went for the run, but it felt so terrible, they can say, great job, way to get out there and do it. Having that extra external force can be a really nice motivating factor. And then you want to think about what the barriers are going to be along the way. So, there are some things you can't predict, but most of us had tried to do some of these things before, and we probably have a sense of the stuff that pops up that gets in our way. So think about that ahead of time. Again, if I picked exercise and I say I'm going to do my workout at the end of my workday, but I know consistently by 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. I'm just too exhausted and I don't do it, how can I problem solve? Maybe I wake up a little bit earlier and do it. Maybe I do it during my lunch break. I'm going to find some way to problem solve ahead of time before I even face the problem. It'll make it a little bit easier to not just get stuck and throw the whole thing out the window. And just keep in mind, this really isn't about getting rapid results. This is about building those reserves in the long term. So it's really intended to help you build up your well-being over time. It's completely okay to be thoughtful and take your time with progress. Again, this current situation feels like crisis mode, but we also know it might last for quite some time. So we want to do something that's going to be sustainable and will last us in the coming weeks and months. So aside from sort of building our reserves generally, it can also be really helpful to have coping strategies to provide more immediate relief during particularly stressful moments. So when the kids are yelling at you because you didn't make the lunch they wanted, or you get that email from your boss saying you missed the Zoom meeting. And the aim is to come up with a few strategies that will bring that temperature down on the distress thermometer right then in that moment. So just like you did for building your reserves in the long run, you can pull out a pen and paper, jot down a little sort of coping plan for yourself if you want to. And there are a few specific things that you want to think about. The very first tip is to come up with a little mantra or a little coping thought that will help you push through tough moments. You can see some examples up here. These are examples from families I've worked with. I had one mom who, in the middle of her child tantruming, would always tell herself, I'm super mom, I'm super mom, I'm super mom. I've had families who would say, this won't last forever, or this is hard, but I can get through it, or I have chocolate waiting for me, or whatever it is. So something that when you're in the thick of it, you can sort of repeat to yourself, go to your Zen place, your happy place, your place of mental toughness, your fortitude, and ride out that wave as the thermometer is rising. The next thing you do is think of a number of tasks, small tasks, that will bring you a sense of calm, a sense of relaxation, relief, a little bit of happiness. These aren't things that are going to take a long time or be really complicated, really small, tiny items. So like having a cup of tea, again, putting on your favorite song. My personal favorite is I have this lotion that smells like warm vanilla sugar, and I give myself a little lotion and hand massage, and it just helps turn that dial down for me. It takes 30 seconds. So think of, in that moment when I don't have 30 minutes to do a long exercise video or call my sister for support, what's something I can do right now, 2 minutes or less, that will help reset my meter a little bit. And then you want to think about any skills you may have used before that have been helpful for you. So if you've been in treatment before and have worked with specific, therapy strategies, or just in living life, you've done things that have helped you relax or help you feel good, they'll probably work here too. So we don't want to abandon everything that's worked for you prior to this just because it's a different situation. So think of what you've done in the past to help you relax. Do you like deep breathing? Do you like muscle relaxation? Do you have any coping thoughts that have helped you in the past? Do you have certain communication skills that have worked really well for you? Really thinking about what's worked before and trying to pull them into your toolbox as much as possible now. And then once you have a few of those strategies, you want to figure out how and when you're going to use them. And like Dr. Bennett was saying before, we know that in the heat of the moment, it's sort of easy to forget these things. So it's really great to come up with a coping plan ahead of time, but we want to make sure we're actually able to access it in the moment. So to do that, preemptively think through your day and pinpoint a handful of the times where coping is likely to be helpful. Again, you won't be able to predict everything that comes up, but families usually have a good sense of the hot button issues, right? So maybe it's when I can see my kids are starting to get restless, I know we're leading into a higher stress situation, or right before we start homework, or before bedtime, or maybe it's just when I wake up in the morning, I need a few minutes of calm before I get started with my day. So thinking about when during your routine would it be most helpful to take a few moments for yourself. And then you want to think about, how am I going to remember to use them? Do I need to set an alarm? Do I need a visual cue? Do I need a sticky note that says breathe? If you have a partner, can they give you a signal when they think it might be helpful for you to use? I certainly have texted a friend saying, I'm getting really stressed out right now, and then she can remind me to take my deep breath or put on music that I like, and friends are usually more than happy to help you in those moments. So again, using your social support, but making sure you have reminders to access those skills. Just a quick note about this too, a lot of parents wrote in and asked about how to help their kids cope. Feel free to create a similar coping plan for them. You can write it up, you can hang it on the fridge as a reminder. If you have a teenager or a young adult, we have lots of people who like to put it in the notes page on their phone or through an app, something like that. But something like this is totally appropriate for anybody, regardless of how old they are. And you'll obviously just sort of switch out the different strategies you use based on what works for them, their age, and so on.
So, as hard as we all may be working to use skills and to decrease our stress, there is still just a lot of really hard things happening right now. And with everyone at home all the time, there is bound to be more moments that are very tense and potentially more conflict. So, as we talked about before, it can be really hard to be skillful and to communicate effectively when your distress is really high or when emotions are running high. Often that's when we're saying things that we wish we hadn't said later. So it's easy for arguments to spiral out of control, particularly without any of our normal outlets for de-stressing. And it can make for a chaotic or even unpleasant or uncomfortable home environment. So with that in mind, we want to talk about some strategies to help keep peace and help keep your home as harmonious as possible. So the first step is to try to avoid the fight in the first place. A lot of conflicts arise when two people have interpreted a situation differently, or when kids feel like they've been taken by surprise. Even if we don't think that they have been, but they may feel like that. For example, if you tell your child they need to clean their room and they pick up their toys, but they don't make their bed, you clearly feel that they haven't finished that task. They haven't totally cleaned their room, and they are also 100% sure that they did and that they did it well. Another common fight is when kids want to watch TV and then get really upset because they didn't realize that was only going to happen, that was only an option after they finished their homework and not before. So one way to try to avoid these miscommunications, even when you feel like, maybe you're a broken record, you've said it so many times, is we want to come up with ways that we can be very explicitly clear about our expectations, about what our household rules or guidelines are. What very specific behaviors are you expecting from your kids? And when you say behave or listen, does that mean speak quietly? Does that mean keep your hands to yourself? Does that mean finish all your homework? There's lots of times that we may give a direction, but it doesn't, very clearly communicate the specific tasks that we mean when we give that direction. So another way to think about it in general is, what is the plan for the day? What should your kids expect in order for the day to go well? What do you expect from them for the day to go as you would like it to be? So having a kind of the take home is giving really clear, specific commands, making your household expectations very clear to everyone. That might usually mean putting them in writing or in pictures. We talked about this in a webinar last week, but somehow making it very crystal clear what the bare minimum expectations are that everyone's going to pitch in to make the house run harmoniously. And that may also mean then, what happens if those expectations aren't met. It can also be helpful to take a moment and try to see a situation from the other person's perspective. Now, we've heard this before, and in the middle of an argument, it's easy to feel like the other person is trying to make our life difficult and we may not be able to see things from their perspective. But it's usually not the case that our loved ones are that they're really trying to make our lives miserable, or that people wake up in the morning and their goal for the day is to make life hard for everyone around them, even though we might feel like we know people who take that goal on. More often than not, there is some sort of emotion that's underlying that behavior. There's anxiety or sadness or hurt or confusion that's putting people on edge and making it difficult for them to communicate what's really going on for them and to act effectively. So if you can try to understand why someone may be acting the way that they are, you may then in turn be more likely to remain calm and to respond appropriately, or to respond in a way that de-escalates the situation rather than ramping it up. And the third tool that can be helpful in the moment is to try validation. This can be a helpful tool, again, to de-escalate a situation. When your child or your partner is starting to get agitated, it's very easy. We often try to jump in or problem solve or tell them to calm down or assume, we know how to fix the situation, or we get very agitated ourselves. Sometimes these emotions can be contagious. All of these can make the situation escalate more quickly. So if we can instead take a moment and try to convey to the other person, almost reflect like a mirror what we think, what they're saying, or to say that, what they're feeling makes sense. I understand why you're feeling that way. Try to name that emotion. It's less likely that they'll escalate, and more likely that they then might be willing to listen to what you have to say. So we got a lot of questions on this topic. How do we encourage appropriate behavior? How do we motivate our kids to act in the way that we want them to act right now? It can be very helpful to use praise or small rewards to reinforce good behavior. As stressed as we are as adults right now, we know that our kids are also experiencing a lot of change and a fair amount of uncertainty. So we do want to make sure to give them credit for any of the appropriate or helpful behaviors that we see from our kids. So, and we want to be really specific. So this is called labeled praise, which means we're being very specific about the praise that we're giving, very specific labeled praise and rewards. They feel good, and because it feels good, it increases the chances of more good behavior. So these strategies let kids know exactly what they did right to get your attention, and it increases the chances that they will do it again to get more positive attention. We know that parental attention is one of the most powerful reinforcers of children's behavior. But often when things are going well, we tend to pay less attention, because when things are going well, then we finally have a moment to do whatever it is that we've been waiting to do, that we've needed to do all day. But when things are going well and you see your kids finally doing the things that you want them to be doing, that is the time to pay extra special attention to the little things that you want to see more of. And the converse to this, that I'll talk a little bit more about later, is we want to pay less attention to the things that we want to see less of, but we'll get back to that later. We do want to try to avoid punishment or excessive punishment. In the middle of a big fight or a big argument or a power struggle, it's very easy to say, you know, you're going to lose your iPad for a week, or if this doesn't change, you know, we're taking this away, no more phone for the rest of the night. Unfortunately, this tends to then send kids into even bigger meltdown, and then you have nothing left to incentivize them with, because you've taken away the things that motivate them the most. So it can be okay to have consequences, but we generally recommend taking privileges away in smaller chunks, like a 10 to 15 minute loss of a preferred activity. Or if you already have a plan in place where they're working to earn some privilege, you know, maybe they earn less of that privilege if they haven't totally met your expectations. So keeping it focused on that sort of token economy. They can earn privileges by meeting those very clear expectations that you've laid out for them. And if they aren't earning it, then they know why, and they know how to do better next time. So then they'll have an opportunity to try again at a later point. We also got a lot of questions, parents writing in asking about how do we deal with sibling fights right now. This is a tough one. So as much as possible, try to avoid the fights in the first place if you can. I know this is not entirely possible or always within our control. But again, one way to just start laying the groundwork is to be very clear about your families. What are our household expectations for how we treat each other, how we communicate, and how everyone gets along? Sibling relationships can be an opportunity for kids to learn, as hard as it is, to communicate effectively about how they're feeling and how to problem solve with another person. These are important life skills. We can also teach this through modeling. So we should be mindful of our own behaviors when we're modeling problem solving and communicating effectively about our emotions. Other prevention strategies include planning in advance. So if there's always fights over the same topic, so if siblings are constantly fighting over who gets to pick the show or what video game they play, or one sibling's taking the other kid's computer or preferred activity, we can use schedules to decide who gets what when. And again, if it's really clearly laid out and everyone knows what the plan is, they may be more likely to follow those rules and go, find other activities so that they're not arguing over the same activity. You can also use schedules to minimize the amount of time that they're even interacting, or that they're in the same room if they just can't stop fighting when they're in the same room or in the same space if you have limited rooms. When one kid has free time, the other one helps with dinner, and then they switch. One helps with the dishes and the other one has free time. So we're keeping kids occupied at different times with different activities, so there's less time for them to get into fights. And we spoke about this in one of our webinars last week, but we can incentivize getting along with family goals. So we talked last week about a family jar, Catch You Being Good jar, where we're all working towards some family reward by by meeting some goal. So for example, if the kids can go a week with fewer than 2 arguments, or maybe fewer than 2 arguments per day, we want it to be achievable for your family, they can earn extra screen time on the weekend. And then this motivates everyone to work together to achieve that reward, if it's something that everybody is motivated by. For younger kids, you can reward those small moments of kindness or helpfulness by, I caught you being good, they put a token in a jar. When you notice that they're helping each other out. Oh, I love the way you helped your brother clean that up. Let's put some tokens in the family jar. Also having a plan for chill out spaces. So each kid has a corner. They can put a book, their favorite toy, maybe the iPad, a snack, things that are going to help them calm down when they need it. So when they start to get upset, they can go to their chill out space for a few minutes to re-regulate and calm down. This also works for us, for parents. We can have our own chill out spaces when we need a couple minutes to just calm down, re-regulate, and then come back to a situation that's stressful. Pairing that with the reward system, maybe if your child opts to go into their chill out zone or demonstrates that they're calming themselves down effectively, they can earn a token or a point each time they use their space or their strategies instead of getting angry or upset or starting a fight.
So, as hard as we try to use these skills and avoid the fights and encourage appropriate behavior, it doesn't always work out. So when we find that, your family is heading towards a fight, we still want to put strategies in place to try and halt the escalation, particularly if you notice that fights tend to become really non-productive or destructive. So signs that this is occurring is when comments become really nasty and mean, there's really high defensiveness, an unwillingness to see the other person's perspective or problem solve, or you just feel really overcome or flooded with emotion. Because those types of fights can really start to erode the relationship, it's important that we try to stop them from getting to that point, which is easier said than done. But in order to do that, we really want to pay attention to our own distress thermometer so that we can walk away before we sort of explode, before we hit our boiling point. If we waited until we reached our peak, it's really difficult to remove yourself at that point. So how do we go about this? So, when everyone's calm, not in the middle of a fight, pick a time, sit down with your family members and think about a handful of steps. The first thing is to try and identify how you know that you're getting close to your boiling point. What are the signs that you're starting to ramp up on that thermometer? Do you feel red in the face? Do you start to freeze? Do your answers get shorter and shorter? And remember, again, you want to look for signs that you're starting to get close to your boiling point, not that you're already there. Once everyone in the family has done that, agree amongst all of you that you're allowed to take a break if you're close to your boiling point. And again, the key is a break. This doesn't mean you get to walk away completely, but if we want to try to avoid those really destructive fights, you're allowed to take a break if you're nearing that peak. So once you've done that, in the argument, you want to be able to check in with yourself. As you are engaging, you can see things escalating, you can see your kids getting agitated. Check in and try and, assess, am I getting close to that boiling point? One little tip is sometimes kids want nothing to do with this system. They're like, I'm not doing this, I don't care about this. But you as a parent know they can see when they might be reaching their boiling point. So even if your kids aren't on board, you can still sort of pay attention for them, which then brings us to step 4. If you notice you're getting close, call a timeout. Say that you need to re-regulate, take a little break, and then all the families break and do something skillful until you feel calmer. So again, going back to your kids, if they decide that they're not on board with this, as you're in this argument, you can see it escalating and you can see them getting closer to bursting. Even if you're okay, still call a timeout for yourself. Everyone can go to their separate corners, do something to calm themselves down, and then return. And keep in mind too, it's really important that when you walk away to do something actively to feel calmer. A lot of times when we break in the middle of an argument, we just sit there sort of planning our next line of attack or ruminating about that really nasty thing the person said, and there's no way our thermometer is going to decrease at all. So that's when we pull out our coping plan that you guys just came up with and try and use some of those skills. And then once you've calmed down, then you can return to the conversation. For a lot of families, that's like at least 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes. And I think one thing to keep in mind is, again, as we're getting more agitated, it's hard to walk away. And a lot of times we feel like we have to resolve this conversation right now. We have to get to it. I have to get my kid on board. I have to get my partner on board. But remembering that once you reach that boiling point, it's not just that the conversation isn't helpful, it can be actively harmful. And there are very few conversations that really can't wait 20 minutes or 30 minutes, especially when they're going to be much more effective if everyone's had a chance to cool off a little bit.
And that step 5 is important. Even if you return to it later that evening or the next morning, coming back to the conversation, often, whether it's with your partner or with your kid, if something has made everyone that upset and you decide to take a break, it is important that you return to the topic so that when people are calm, we can talk about how to problem solve or to resolve this disagreement more effectively. That may not be true for every single little argument, but often it is important that we don't completely avoid these topics because they're sure to come up again. It's just meaning we're going to work it out better if we're calm. So we wanted to spend some time answering the questions that you all sent in. We've made a list of some of the common themes and common questions that came up. So one question that came in from you all, how do you express strong emotions constructively? We've talked about this a little bit, but for one, when you're feeling really strong emotions, that would be a time to use your own personal timeout or to use the chill out space and use your own coping strategies to calm yourself down enough so that you can be constructive in your communication. Try to use words, emotion words, to explain how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. Try to stick to the facts and sticking to your own experiences. I feel this because of this, that, we've learned those I statements. One reason why that works is because, what we're feeling is true. We don't always know what the other person's feeling or what the other person's intentions were or what the other person is thinking, even though we think we may know those. You don't know those as fact. We know what we're experiencing. So that's a good starting place when you're trying to communicate constructively. You can put out there, what you would like to have be different or what you would like from another person, to try to change the way that you're feeling. But again, we also have to remember that we can't control other people. We have the most control over our own behavior, not over our emotions per se, but over our behavior and the way that we communicate about our emotions and what we choose to do when we're feeling those emotions. And these are important skills to teach our kids as well. Question 2, how do you hold your children accountable for their behavior, especially when they have anxiety and worry? Well, again, I often tell kids and parents, your emotion is totally okay. There's nothing wrong with the emotion. Emotions are normal. Emotions communicate very important information to us. So we validate the emotion, and you can use those emotion words, again, help your kids to learn, to put words to what it is that they may be feeling. The emotion is always okay, but the behavior that your child chooses that may be influenced by their emotion can either make a situation better or can make a situation worse. So while their emotions are okay, their behavior may not always be okay. So that's one way we can make a distinction about holding our kids accountable for their behavior, even if they're feeling strong emotions, in the same way we just spoke about for ourselves. So we teach and we model effective coping skills to help kids manage their emotions appropriately and select those appropriate constructive behaviors that they can then use when they're feeling those emotions. And then we reinforce them accordingly. So when you see your child acting brave or trying something, even when they're feeling anxious about it, we really want to label that. I'm so proud of you for sticking with that, even though I know it was hard, or that was so brave of you to try that thing, even though it made you feel a little nervous. We can, if kids who are anxious may act out or tantrum, because that's a way of controlling the environment or getting out of something that makes them feel uncomfortable. Again, we can validate that the emotion is okay, but those behaviors are not. We don't have to permit them just because they're motivated by a very true and real emotion. So this sort of leads to the next two questions. What do I do when my child, doesn't do what she has agreed to? So following this plan and the plans that we've been talking about so far, if you have these very clear expectations laid out for your child's behavior, your child should know what's expected of her and what will happen if she doesn't meet those expectations, typically a loss of a privilege, or they don't earn a particular reward just yet. They have to keep trying. Then it should be very clear to both of you what the consequences are if she's not doing what she's agreed to do. That's one of the reasons why it's really helpful to have these things written down, and that you're communicating about what those expectations are and what happens if they're not met. And if your child's consistently missing, they're just not getting it, right? Then you may want to think about why that is and make adjustments to the plan. Not that we necessarily need to change all of our expectations for our kids' behavior, but we can think about what it is that's making this particular time of day really challenging, or this particular behavior keeps coming up again and again, or maybe the reward's not motivating enough, or we're not, or it's not happening frequently enough. Sometimes kids need very frequent reinforcers of their behavior, so we can make little adjustments if they're consistently missing the mark, or you feel like you're having that same argument over and over and over again. And how do I manage toddler tantrums? It's, toddler tantrums are tough. This brings us back to what I said earlier about ignoring the behaviors that you want to see less of. Tantrums persist because they are very effective in controlling the environment. They change our behavior as parents because we really don't like them. So changing situations that the toddler doesn't like, tantrums are effective in doing that. Again, even with a toddler, you can try to validate. You can try to name the feelings if you can guess what they are, even if they don't seem rational all the time. We always want to ensure that they're safe, that they're not, going to hurt themselves, and then either sit with them through it or ensure their safety and walk away and ignore it. But we don't want to give into it. Overall, you stay calm and try to stay focused on the task at hand. You just kind of sit there and tolerate. You can let them express and get out what they need to get out while you largely ignore the bedlam. And then you kind of bring them back to what you wanted them to do in the first place. Sometimes distraction can help, or humor can help kind of get them out of it. But largely it's ignoring the behavior. You stay calm and then kind of refocus back on what needs to happen.
So we got a lot of people who wrote in and asked, what do you do when, me and my partner, we manage things differently, or we have different parenting styles, or we have conflict? How do we manage these things so they don't impact the kids? I think there are very few parents who have exactly the same parenting style, right? Everyone just comes from a different place. You have different perspectives, different things that are your sticking points, and that's totally appropriate. So when you're noticing that you have different styles, go back to the places you do have common ground. What do you both want for your kids? You both want them to be happy. You both want them to be safe and secure. That might look differently to you in terms of what you have in your head, but go back to your common ground and see what you can do to, just like we talked about before, see it from the other person's perspective, validate, and then make some compromises along the way, right? So you might have a thing or two that are really so important, you're just really not willing to budge. And you have some other things that are kind of annoying when your partner does it that way, but it's really not the end of the world. Whereas for them, that might be their real sticking point. So find the places for you that you really feel like, this is so important to me, I can't budge on this, but I am willing to give some ground here. Your partner can do the same, and be able to be flexible and work with each other. When you're finding that the person forgets, or they do that thing again that just drives you crazy, and why would you do that, and why didn't you back me up? Again, going to that place of finding common ground together, using that boiling point when the fight starts to escalate, take a step back, use your coping skills, and return to the conversation. And in terms of generally resolving conflicts so that doesn't impact the kids, as much as possible, you want to present a united front to your children. Even if you disagree on things, when you're communicating with them together, try and present what both of you can be on board with. And if you have moments where you don't agree or you're not sure how to respond, you can always tell your kids, we're not sure yet, we'll talk about it and we'll get back to you. And then you can go have that conversation, or the little, the argument or the tiff or what have you, sort of behind closed doors, and then return once you feel like you've come to sort of an agreement. I think this one's really tricky when it comes to our kids. We get so, we get so escalated because we care about them so much, and we're really sure that our way is the way we should be doing it. But most things are not necessarily make or break, for your child. So thinking of places again where you can sort of be flexible. There are a lot of questions about managing conflicts around schoolwork. I think this goes back to the earlier suggestions of coming up with clear schedules and clear expectations. So, what is it that you're expecting of your child? I think this is really hard right now as kids are adapting to these totally different learning environments. And a lot of our kids still sort of feel like, this is extended spring break. They're not really in school mode when they're doing work from home. So, you can validate that and still set up what expectations you have with them. I'm expecting you to log on to each one of your e-learning classes. I expect that you're doing 30 minutes of reading. I expect to see your completed assignments at the end of the night. Whatever it is that you want to see, set that expectation clearly, and you pair that with what's the reward when they do it? Is it praise? Is it extra screen time? Is it whatever? And what happens if they don't do that? Is that a loss of privilege or earlier bedtime or what have you? And then we had a few questions about, how do I deal with the power struggles between me and my child? It's so hard, and kids can be so good at pushing our buttons sometimes, and a lot of times we sort of get sucked into feeling like we have to resolve this conversation right now. We feel like we sort of have to win this battle in order to maintain control of the situation. But what I would sort of recommend thinking about is, if your child succeeds in pushing all of your buttons, they've sort of maintained control of the situation, right? They've caused you to react just how they wanted you to. So being able to take the step back, use the coping skills, re-regulate, even if you didn't get them to do exactly what you needed them to do in that moment, you've maintained control of yourself and your own reactions, and that's what's going to be helpful in the long run. So if it isn't a conversation that literally has to be addressed right this second, take the 15 minutes, calm yourself down, get into a better headspace, and then you can come back. And if we again think about those rewards and those consequences, that can also be really helpful, because rather than having to try to persuade your kid to do it your way or convince them that it's the right way, the reward or consequence can speak for themselves. You can set the expectation. If they do it, great, they get the reward. If they don't do it, bummer, they don't earn that extra screen time. You don't have to fight about it. That's just the situation. And after a week where they realize, oh, mom really isn't giving in, dad really isn't giving in, that's going to be their incentive to change their behavior, rather than having, the 18th fight about it with you this week. So a few more questions have popped up. One person asked, is speaking to a therapist considered self-care? Absolutely. If you're finding that either you're really struggling, you're having a hard time using any of these skills or other skills, or generally you're coping really well, but this is just really hard and stressful, by all means, get some professional support. It's always helpful to spend that time on yourself. Again, the time you put in will sort of come back to you and how you're able to cope and be effective the rest of your week. We had another question. I'm also just noting a few people are raising your hands. If you can write into the question and answer comment, we'll be able to see those. How do you help your child self-regulate when they're expressing themselves through physical attack towards you, your partners, or their siblings? It's really tricky when children start to be aggressive. It can be really scary, and I think that tends to be where we're inclined to sort of back off and to say, like, never mind, which makes sense because obviously we want to make sure everyone's safe. I do think using some of those sort of preemptive strategies to try and decrease the likelihood of getting to peak can be really helpful. And then also setting up a plan ahead of time. So if you can see your child is starting to get aggressive, is the plan that everyone else is going to go into the other room and just mom is going to stay with the child, or just dad is going to stay with the child? Is there going to be an incentive for them using some of their more effective skills rather than getting aggressive? And paired with that is, are they going to lose screen time or what have you if they hit or kick or punch or whatever? So, being able to try to, cut it off before it hits the peak, which isn't always possible. And if it does, making sure the rest of the family is safe and trying to help incentivize your child to remain calm or use other strategies in the future. Any other questions? All right.
Thanks, everyone. We I think have one more, right, webinar, and we will be repeating these series. So you can also view some of the previous webinars at the website on the screen.
And we got about that. We had a lot of questions about scheduling time and a lot of questions about helping your kids cope. Our first 2 webinars were specifically about those topics. So absolutely take a look at those and there'll be more detailed responses to those questions. Okay. All right, thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate your time. We hope this is helpful. Once we close this, you'll be redirected to a very, very brief 3-question survey. We'd really love your feedback. Any other topics you'd like to see in the future, anything we could do to make these webinars more helpful for you. We're absolutely taking a look at that feedback and making adjustments along the way. So, we look forward to our webinar tomorrow and hope you're all able to join us. Thanks so much.
I'm noticing a couple questions about teenagers, and I just want to note we do have some future webinars coming up in a couple weeks that will be that'll be specifically focused on teenagers and young adults. So the websites that are on the screen right now, particularly the Youth Anxiety, the New York Presbyterian Youth Anxiety Center, if you keep an eye on that website, you can access these webinars, the past webinars, through either website, through the POCAT website or the Youth Anxiety website. And the Youth Anxiety Center will be putting out some future content that's focused specifically on teens and young adults. So thank you all again for being with us tonight, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thanks so much. Bye.